He hit me. They asked what I did to provoke him. Those words echo in the minds of countless survivors, a question that should never be asked, but is all too common. It's a phrase that reveals just how deeply victim blaming is woven into our culture. Instead of offering comfort or support, it shifts the focus from the person who committed the harm to the person who endured it. I remember the first time I heard someone say those words to a friend of mine. The disbelief, the pain in her eyes. It was as if the world had turned its back on her twice, once when she was hurt, and again when she reached out for help. That's a sentence that should never exist, but sadly, for far too many women it's reality. Every day survivors of abuse are met with suspicion, doubt and questions that imply they are somehow at fault for the violence they've experienced. It's a reality that leaves deep emotional scars, often more painful than the physical ones. I've sat in rooms with survivors who flinched at every unexpected sound, who apologized for taking up space, who questioned whether they deserved kindness. The damage goes so much deeper than what we can see. Hi, I'm glad you're here, because today I want to talk about something that is uncomfortable but essential. When victims of abuse speak out, why do we question them? Why do we ask what they did wrong instead of focusing on the person who hurt them? Why do we, as a society, so often turn our gaze away from the abuser and instead interrogate the survivor? These are questions we need to confront honestly and openly if we want to create a world where survivors feel safe to share their stories. I've spent years listening to survivors, and the pattern is always the same. The first hurdle isn't just escaping the abuse, it's convincing others that the abuse even happened. I want to share a story. Sarah, a young woman, found the courage to report her partner's violence after years of emotional manipulation and fear. She walked into a police station, bruised and terrified. The first question she heard wasn't, "How can we help you?" It was, "What did you do to make him so angry?" Imagine the courage it takes to walk through those doors, to risk everything by speaking up, only to be met with skepticism and blame. For Sarah and for so many others, that moment is a turning point. Not just in their case, but in their sense of self-worth and trust in others. Sarah later told me that she almost turned around and left. She wondered if maybe she was overreacting, if maybe she really was to blame. That seed of doubt planted by a single question can take years to uproot. That question doesn't just sting, it silences. It reinforces the idea that the victim is somehow responsible for the abuse. It tells survivors that their pain is up for debate, that their suffering is a puzzle to be solved rather than a wound to be healed. It's a message that echoes through every interaction, every sideways glance, every doubting question. I've heard survivors say they'd rather keep quiet than risk being shamed or dismissed. The silence becomes a shield, but it's a heavy one to carry. For many, this is the moment they decide never to speak up again. It's why only about a third of victims ever reach out for help. Not because they don't want support, but because they're scared of being blamed or dismissed. The fear of not being believed, of being interrogated instead of supported, is enough to keep countless people silent. And that silence can be deadly. I remember a time when I tried to help a friend, only to watch her retreat further into herself after a single dismissive comment from someone she trusted. The pain of not being believed can be as isolating as the abuse itself. When we ask the wrong questions, we close doors that should be open. We make it harder for survivors to seek justice, to find healing, and to rebuild their lives. The ripple effects of this doubt can last for years, affecting relationships, mental health, and even the ability to trust oneself. I've seen survivors struggle to form new friendships, to trust new partners, to believe in their own worth. The echoes of those first questions follow them everywhere. And abuse doesn't always leave visible scars. Sometimes it's isolation, cutting you off from friends and family. Sometimes it's the slow erosion of your confidence, the constant feeling that you're walking on eggshells, never sure what will set off the next storm. I once spoke with a survivor who described her life as living in a house full of invisible tripwires. She never knew what would trigger the next outburst, so she learned to make herself small, to disappear. Sometimes it's control, gaslighting, or verbal attacks that eat away at your confidence. Abuse can be subtle, insidious, and hard to name. It can be a pattern of manipulation, a steady drip of criticism, or a campaign to make you doubt your own reality. I remember a friend who kept a journal, just to remind herself of what was real and what wasn't, because her partner's words made her question her own memory. Let's talk about Alex. He's a trans man whose partner controlled every part of his life. When he confided in friends, they shrugged it off. She's a woman, how bad could it be? But abuse doesn't care about gender, and pain isn't defined by stereotypes. Alex's story reminds us that anyone can be a victim, and anyone can be an abuser. The myths we hold about who looks like a victim or a perpetrator only serve to protect those who do harm and isolate those who need help. Alex told me that the hardest part wasn't the abuse itself, but the loneliness that followed. He felt invisible, erased by people's assumptions. See, when we only listen to stories that fit our assumptions, we give abusers more power. We fail victims twice. Once when they're hurt, and again when we refuse to believe them. Our silence, our disbelief, and our judgment become part of the abuse itself. We become complicit in their pain, even if we never raised a hand. I've seen communities close ranks around abusers, unwilling to believe that someone they know could do harm. That denial is a shield for the abuser and a prison for the survivor. But it doesn't have to be like this. We can choose to be different. We can choose to listen, to believe, and to support. We can be the people who break the cycle of silence and shame. I've seen the difference it makes when just one person says, "I believe you." It's like a light turning on in a dark room. If someone tells you they're being abused, believe them. Your belief could be the first step in their journey to safety. It could be the lifeline they need to escape, to heal, and to reclaim their life. I've heard survivors say that a single moment of compassion changed everything for them. Sometimes it's not about having the right words. It's about being there, about not turning away. If they say they're scared, don't downplay it. Don't offer excuses for their abuser or suggest that things aren't as bad as they seem. Instead, offer your presence, your empathy, and your support. Sometimes, just sitting in silence with someone, letting them know they're not alone, is the most powerful thing you can do. If they reach out, be the person who says, "I'm here for you." Sometimes just knowing that someone cares, that someone is willing to listen without judgment, can make all the difference. I've seen survivors blossom when they finally feel safe, when they know they're believed. That's the power we all have, to help someone reclaim their story. In the video description, I've linked resources for support, whether you're dealing with domestic abuse, emotional manipulation, or identity-based violence. There are people and organizations ready to help, to listen, and to stand with you. You don't have to go through this alone. I encourage you, if you're struggling, to reach out. Even if it feels impossible, even if you've been let down before, there are people who care, who will believe you. If you're watching and you need help, remember, you are not alone, you are never to blame, and you are worthy of safety. No matter what anyone says, your story matters. Your feelings are valid, and there is hope, even when it feels far away. I've seen people rebuild their lives from the ashes of abuse. I've seen hope return, slowly, quietly, but surely. Let's stop asking what victims did to provoke their abuse. Let's start asking how we can help them heal. Let's be the generation that ends the cycle of blame and silence and replaces it with compassion and action. I believe we can do better. I believe we can be the people who make a difference, one conversation, one act of kindness at a time. Believe survivors, break the silence, reach out, share, and be a voice for those who aren't heard. Together, we can create a world where no one has to ask, "What did you do to provoke him?" Because we'll know the only question that matters is, "How can I help?" Take care, and remember, your compassion can be the light that guides someone out of the darkness.